yourself talks about in third person. You did such a nice job of it.
It's so hard to come up with that with variety.
I'm honored. Thank you so much for having me. So, as Jay mentioned, I am a fiction writer, but as most fiction writers, well, will not admit, we're kind of always a little bit jealous of poets, because what you all do in those compressed forms, we try to do. We just feel like we just need to put more words in to make the point come across. To that end, we try to write poetic when possible, and I try to do that. Hopefully that'll come across as well. This last year, I spent the year, I gave myself a goal. I was going to write one short piece every week of the year. So 52 stories in 52 weeks. And I got to 48, and then my boy came, and the writing, everyone, that's Elias in the back. And then he came out, my wife, and that's probably not the most poetic way to say that, but you know what I mean. My wife had him, it was very lovely, and of course writing stopped, and so we're picking up pieces. But I'm going to be reading, we're at number 50, and if you guys, after this, you want to come check out more, it's historyofthings.com, that's my portfolio site, you can check it out. But I'm at 50, and I'm going to read you not all 52 or 50 stories, you're lucky. I'm just going to read a few, hopefully choice ones. So what do I write? Real quick, I think Jay did a really great job. I don't know if I can live up to that, but let me just say that I do try to, it's hard to categorize yourself, right? But I guess I try to figure out if I had to. When I started writing short pieces, I think I realized that I really love fairy tales. I really love folk tales. I love myths. But I don't write about dragons or wizards or gods. I try to write about like folk tales that kind of somehow incorporate the ordinary and just show the magic in that. And sometimes the magic is good, and sometimes the magic is not so good. So here's an example. This is called The History of Things. The boy looked up, and the clouds spoke to him. This is what they said. That radio antenna over to the left, the giant metal X on Twin Peaks stuck firmly to the hilltop, that's no antenna. It was once alive, a being raising his hands triumphantly into the fog. And the stadium light at Kezar's, the one your father's always complaining is too bright. In another life, it was a flower whose petals glowed in the darkness. The boy listened to these secrets and others like them. And when the clouds were done telling him about the other many things that surrounded him, the boy could not help but ask why all these things had changed. He was young and did not know better than to ask such a thing. This is what the clouds told him. The world was once different. It was not unusual to be thankful, to call out to the heavens from the highest peak and smile. But even back then, long before men and women walked the earth, there was already jealousy. At that time, jealousy roamed the earth instead of the people's hearts. This jealousy was constant, and contrary to common opinion, not green at all. Jealousy looked on at all the happy beings in the world, and true to his nature, the happier and the more thankful they were, the more his chest ached. That was the way jealousy thought of the feeling, but it wasn't pain. There was just something in his heart that he couldn't control. People nowadays don't get it. The fact that jealousy did not mean to her anymore. He was just the way he was. After years and years, as his feeling at the center of him grew, jealousy finally couldn't take him any longer. He went away and hid himself in a deep, dark cave, though no one is sure where that cave is now. And he cut his chest open and took out the frozen hunk that was his heart. What came next was instant. There was no vegetation left for miles and miles around the cave. Only white powder and weeds and twigs were left. The land, it seemed, was becoming sad. And that cold sadness kept pouring down through the world, spreading out in waves from jealousy's cave. The effect was that all those creatures, like what we now call an antenna or a stadium light, beings who were once alive and happy and who gave thanks to the world, now were lifeless. And they were not the only ones. Skyscrapers became skyscrapers, and bridges became bridges. In each case, all these beings lost their capital letter to a lowercase death. But then, how did they come to be? How passed, and the clouds were done speaking. You were the descendants of jealousy, the clouds told the boy. For you see, when jealousy removed his heart, his blood flowed and combined with the sadness of the earth, and out of that came you. The boy wept at hearing this, and the clouds felt bad for causing so much sadness for such a young boy. They came together and tried to make pictures in the sky that would make the boy feel better. They became cotton candy and clowns smiling, and knights on horses and giant fluffy birds. But the boy could not be consoled, and he wept until he had nothing left in him except the awareness that things around him were more than mere things.
Wow.
Thank you. So that gives you a feel for it, right? I kind of try to do this mix of olden time, fairy tale, myth stuff, retelling. But, you know, when you're writing these things, you also want to try to engage the world as is. And so one thing that I do, my job when I'm not writing these things, I'm a teacher, I work in a mission, I work in a project actually. I teach GED, and for those of you who don't know, it's adult alternative education, right? And a lot of the people I work with, the at-risk youth, you know, a lot of them live in these very unmagical places. And so part of me, I don't know what it is, Catholic guilt or whatnot, I feel sometimes guilty writing these fairy tales because I'm like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Will someone see the point in that? I mean, there's a philosophical point, but will someone see the connection to the world, right? Because I guess I want writing to do something more than just kind of be like, oh, that's so enjoyable, right? So sometimes I try to write my fairy tales or magical twists, and I try to set them in, as Jay said, in the gritty. So here's one of those. This is called Happiness is Hard to Meet. Gladys, a.k.a. Miss G, the OG, or Thea, as she was known to the kids on the block. Even the Lee girls, who had no idea what that word meant, still called her that, Thea. Had always been that positive presence in the neighborhood. Before the city had come in and razed the old projects and replaced them with brightly painted townhouse-style homes, Miss G had a smile on her face for everyone. From the occasional sour-mouthed cop who was never around when people needed him, to the young men on the stoop who were up to God knows what, to the day worker who sold lunch in between card games and the odd construction job. Miss G's smile warmed them all, and her neighbors looked out for her. At least they did look out for her until they had to do more than look. A few months back, while coming back from the Save Mart with her groceries for the week, a new guy in the neighborhood, a bulldog of a young man with a neck as thick as Miss G's thigh, came up from behind and knocked the bag she was holding out of her hands. Though Miss G was a smiler, she also had a fighter's temper. She'd grown up on that block and was unable to give up her place of respect or her purse without fighting. "How dare you," she said to the young stranger. "You know who I am?" The young man didn't answer. With a practiced hand, he pushed her down while relieving her of her handbag. Miss G hit her head on the cement pretty hard that day. She didn't feel the pain, not at first. The initial hurt came in realizing that somehow over the years, she'd become old. She didn't look at the young man who was walking away with her purse. She looked at her hands instead, which still had the squared-off knuckles from the many fights she'd won when she was younger, probably the same age as the young man who just pushed her down. But she'd never been a bully. She liked to think of herself as someone who defended others who needed defending. Miss G got herself up, picking up her groceries, some of which had spilled onto the sidewalk, and let herself into her house. As it turned out, her skull throbbing and her realization about her aging was a blessing. It kept her mind from wondering who would be there for her now that she needed defending. She turned her television as loud as she could, trying not to think of her neighbors pulling back their drapes and looking out at her from their windows as a young man stole her purse. She didn't want to think of them, but it was hard not to. Harder even than the knot that had formed on her crown. On the TV that blared in her house almost continuously since the incident, Miss G saw an ad for medicine that promised, of all things, happiness. She wasn't one for pills. She hadn't even smoked a joint in 20 years, which was saying something considering the Border Brothers we're always trying to give her some for free just 'cause. But she was feeling desperate then. She already missed her smile. She missed not feeling scared. And then there were her neighbors who kept asking why she wasn't smiling anymore when they passed her on the street. She made an appointment with her doctor in general as a result, an old man who'd been treating her since she was a child. He told her he'd heard of the happiness pill, and that through some deal with a drug company that made with government, it was actually covered by Medicare. She could get 4 pills every month, he told her. Anything over that, and you'll be paying through your nose. Happiness, the good doctor joked, is an expensive habit. Miss G agreed and went home that day with her 4 pills, but she didn't immediately take one. Instead, she turned on her television as loud as she could and waited by her window, looking out for the young man who'd stolen her purse. It took a couple weeks, but he finally came. He was with Luis, a kid from the block who Miss G always knew to be a follower in search of a leader, a punk, basically. She rushed back to her kitchen, got her bottle of pills and a glass of water, and went back to her window and gulped all 4 pills down in a single swallow. Within a few minutes, she could feel the medicine's effect. She wasn't scared anymore, and her smile was back. She came out of her apartment and in a loud, almost drunk-sounding voice called out for Luis. "How's your mama?" she asked. Luis looked nervous and muttered something. The young man who'd stolen her purse didn't say anything, but he turned and approached Miss G. "How are you, young'un?" Miss G asked. But like the other times she'd seen him, he said nothing and pushed her down. Before anyone could stop him, he'd taken things one step further and was on top of Miss G, his fist cocked. "You can have it," she said, though she wasn't sure what she meant exactly. She didn't have anything with her. The pills were making her silly, she thought to herself, right as the young bulldog of a man released his arm and let gravity push his fist down against the old woman's face again and again. Though no one else could see it, the young man had met his match that day. Even through the blood and the teeth and the bone he was breaking down, this crazy old woman was happy. His fists were working overtime, but they couldn't figure out the riddle. Even he and all his muscle were no match for the power of modern medicine.